I am Kay Dunkle, second child of Floyd and Sarah Schreckengost, born in Bryan, the original homestead of the Schreckengosts, on May 17th, 1938. I do remember the bed bugs. I remember Mama, and she would take jar lids and put the kerosene in them. And I remember the stairs went right up through the middle of the house, and there was 2 bedrooms, one on the right and one on the left. The kids must have slept on one side, and I think maybe the right, and Mom and Dad on the other. I don't know how many winters we lived there. Maybe just one winter, maybe, because maybe Dad started the house the next year. Maybe 2 winters. But in the winter time, you'd get up in the morning and there'd be an inch of snow on the windowsills. I remember that. I had allergies, and I was allergic to light. And I always held my hands over my eyes, and I remember the lights, the old oil lamps. Mother made cards that she would put up so the light didn't shine in my eyes, and dust. I was allergic to dust. If you ever notice now, you'll look in the pictures of when I was small, I was always going like this. That's why, because I was allergic to the light. Maybe I got my emotion, and maybe we all did, got our emotions of love from Aunt Libby and Uncle Burl. They were very loving, and we were all with them a lot. I was with them especially a lot when I was, and after Wayne died, I mostly stayed with Aunt Libby, because Mom was expecting Gary, and it was a very emotional time, and I think Aunt Libby just took me. She was just very loving, just like she always was, but she was stern too. You know, I remember one time, I wasn't in school yet, I was little, and Gregory McMeans, who would have been a cousin to that Ronnie Rumbaugh, lived down the street. And I guess I came in missing, I don't know, but he lived across the street. And I went across the street, didn't tell her I went across, and we were over playing on the church steps. She came over and got me. She didn't do anything with me. No, she might have spanked me, I don't remember. But I remember I hid behind the couch till Uncle Burl came home. And then, of course, he went and gathered me up and babied me. And she must have spanked me and told me I wasn't allowed to go over there anymore. So I stayed behind the couch till he got home. I remember some of the depression, too. We had moved up to the other farm. I don't remember the depression, but I remember what we did. You had the sugar stamps. You had these little coupons, and you couldn't get sugar unless you had those coupons. And also I remember the butter. There wasn't butter, and it was when margarine first came out, and you would buy this, it was called margarine, but it was white. And you had to put a yellow coloring in it and then mix it all up. Oh, I remember doing that lots of times. Making the butter or the margarine, putting the coloring in it. You just didn't have things. Oh my, we spent a lot of time shelling peas and snapping beans, and because back then you canned everything. The vegetables, the fruits, the peaches and the pears, and the plums. Dad always had to have plums. And then Mother always made all our jelly. I remember we had to go pick berries. Oh, the huckleberry patch was right across the road. Man, I'd love to go to that huckleberry patch today. It was 30 acres, I think. We picked a lot of huckleberries over there. Lots of them. Mother would make pies, and she would make jelly. And then freezers came into existence. And then she started freezing a lot, and that was a lot easier because all you had to do was the original things like shell them and snap them, but then you just blanched them in a little bit of water and put them in plastic sacks and stuck them in the freezer. And after that, and of course, I remember the first freezer we had, it went the whole way across the basement in the back. It was probably the biggest one you could get. And boy, that thing was always full. And like people said that would come to visit, you could go there at mealtime and Mother always could find, you know, she just went to the freezer and got another package of peas or whatever. And there was always something to eat. Mother always cooked. You know, now we don't do much cooking anymore. But she never taught it. I don't know about the other girls, but we never cooked in the kitchen. In fact, I can remember the first meal I really cooked. I cooked there. When I got married, I didn't know how to cook. Everything I know I taught myself, like making bread and all that. I never did any of that. But I remember they were away. I don't know if they were at the doctors or where they were, but they were late coming home, and I'm looking at the clock, and it's getting later and later, and I thought, gee whiz, I can do this. So I got potatoes out, and I had the potatoes peeled, and I think it was steak. I got steak out and had it thawed and had it ready to put on when they came home, and did a vegetable, and I had supper ready when they got home, wherever they came from. That's the first time, and I was probably a junior or a senior that I ever did it. Now, we always had to help with, I always had to dry dishes. After the meal was over, Mother always washed the dishes, and I always had to dry the dishes. And then she always, and I don't do this, but as soon as she got the dishes done, she swept the floor. I bet she swept the floor twice a day. Because she would sweep the floor in the morning after she did the breakfast dishes, and then she'd sweep the floor the last thing in the evening. But with that many kids, she probably had to. Gary and I went to the old Belknap schoolhouse, a one-room schoolhouse, till I was in 4th grade, and we walked. Oh, and I remember this too. We would walk up the pipeline. Instead of walking up the main road, we'd walk up like the pipeline. And in the spring of the year, there were always violets. And I always picked Mother a bouquet of violets in the spring of the year. And that was her favorite flower. I didn't know then it was her favorite flower, but the violet, I understand, was her favorite flower. But I always picked up violets for her. And they were big. They had long stems and big. They were easy to pick. And Mother and Dad always went to things that were going on in school. You know, they would have the Christmas program, and the kids would all sing, and Santa Claus would come, and that's where we would have pie socials and the cake walks and that type of thing. All those type of things. And Mom and Dad always went to those things. When we came home from school, first thing we had to do was go out and clean the gutters. And we weren't very big then, just little. We had to clean the gutters. Oh, I remember doing that. And bedding the cows. And then we had to throw the silage down. That was hard work, throwing that silage down. You had to climb clear to the top of that silo and throw that silage down, and you had to kind of guess about how much. You knew about how deep to go to throw it down. And then as I got older, I do remember I had to clean the udders, but not like the other girls did, because Gary was there, and then by that time Vernon was getting older, and they probably. But I remember when I was younger, when he first got the tractor, and you made hay the old-fashioned way, where there was a fork. You hauled the hay in on a wagon loose, and there was a loader that you put behind the wagon, and it crawled up. You know, it had teeth that pulled the hay up, and then put it on the wagon, and you had to spread it out. But Gary and I, when we were little, had to go, this is how tight things were, we had to go along behind the hay loader and gather up any little bit of hay that it would miss, and put it on the wagon. We usually did that in our bare feet, too, in those hay stubbles. I remember doing that. Then when you got it to the barn, there was a big fork up in the middle of the barn that they pulled down, and it had 2 tongs on it, and you'd stick it in the hay, and then there was a rope that was attached to a tractor, and the tractor had to go out probably about as far as the end of the corn cribs to pull that hay up and over into the mow. And we had to pull the rope back. Whoever was driving the tractor would back up then after each time, and we had to pull the rope back. And I remember he tried to get Mom to drive the tractor, and Mom couldn't drive the tractor. And gosh, Gary wasn't very old, and he put him on that tractor to drive it out there and back. And then I had to pull the rope back.